An improved receiving core could spell trouble for NFL defenses. Taking a look at the Baltimore Ravens right after the intro.
Perfect.
Before we get too far into things, subscribe to support the channel, and of course, get the bell on to know every single time I'm dropping a video. And with that out of the way, it's on to the content. So John Harbaugh and the Baltimore Ravens made a number of offseason moves that might have flown under the wire, but have overall helped improve this roster. So let's just run down the list, starting off with wide receiver Sammy Watkins, formerly of the Kansas City Chiefs and was drafted by the Buffalo Bills. Sammy Watkins is going to add depth to a wide receiver core that last year absolutely needed it. Sammy Watkins is a savvy veteran, was a first-round pick for the Buffalo Bills coming out of Clemson. Sammy Watkins has the speed to be able to burn by defensive backs, is also a very solid route runner, and plays with a little bit of a chip on his shoulder, so he fights for some of those extra yards. Improving the interior of the offensive line, picking up offensive lineman formerly of the Giants and the Cleveland Browns, Kevin Zeitler, who, congratulations, just recently had a child. Kevin Zeitler is absolutely committed to the game. While in the hospital room with his wife while she was in labor, was even doing pass sets and practicing in the meantime. So this dude's absolutely committed to the game. It's going to help improve the offensive line, especially along the interior, where last year they had some struggles, especially in the running game where the entire Baltimore Ravens offense moves through. Not to say the Ravens still didn't lead the league in rushing yards, but a little bit of that edge is going to be necessary to continue to allow for guys like Lamar Jackson, J.K. Dobbins, and Gus Edwards to break free and pick up even more yards. Another big acquisition, offensive tackle Alejandro Villanueva, going to fill in for the traded Orlando Brown Jr., who they dealt to the Kansas City Chiefs right before the NFL draft. So the Baltimore Ravens picking up a savvy veteran offensive tackle to fill in for the right side of the offensive line, going to be absolutely necessary. Villanueva was a really solid offensive lineman for the Pittsburgh Steelers throughout his entire career. I expect there to be nothing less than that in Baltimore. Checking out the NFL draft for the Baltimore Ravens, one of my favorite draft prospects, wide receiver Rashod Bateman, was their first round selection. Rashod Bateman, footwork is the name of the game with this guy. His ability to separate off of defenders is absolutely paramount, has amazing footwork, incredible hands, and I think he's going to be a lovely addition to that receiver room that already features guys like I mentioned, Sammy Watkins, and of course, Marquise Brown. So Lamar Jackson's going to have a few options to throw to this year, just making sure that you open up that offense, open up that passing game, one of the levels of offense that the Ravens were kind of lacking last year. Their second first-round pick, Odafe Owe out of Penn State, is a bit of a head-scratcher, but it fills in a gap left by Matt Judon. At least that's what Baltimore is hoping for, to get a premier pass rusher in this year's NFL draft. Defense is the name of the game in Baltimore, and Odafe Owe is coming in with some big shoes to fill. Matt Judon leaving for different pastures up in New England with the Patriots, but Owe in his time in college, it becomes a little bit questionable because this last season, going into the NFL draft, he came out of college with 0 sacks. So trying to add to a pass rush with a guy that couldn't even get a sack in his last season in college, a little bit questionable, but we're gonna have to see where things move with that. Beyond these moves, the Baltimore Ravens already have a ton of amazing talent along the roster. Of course, the former unanimous MVP in quarterback Lamar Jackson, and then on the offensive line, you've got one of the best offensive tackles in the NFL in Ronnie Stanley. And then at tight end, you've still got Mark Andrews, who's one of the better tight ends in the NFL outside of that receiver room that I mentioned just a little while ago. Defensively, you've got a few really good players, all pro level players in Marlon Humphrey, Pro Bowl level player in Marcus Peters, and an absolutely savvy veteran pass rusher in Calais Campbell, who's had his fair share of accolades as well. And then on special teams, you've got one of the best kickers of the last decade in Justin Tucker. So all of those offseason improvements and offseason moves are going to be absolutely paramount because the Baltimore Ravens have the second toughest schedule in the NFL this year, according to CBS Sports. With an opponent win percentage of .563, it is second to only their in-division rival, the Pittsburgh Steelers, at a .574. So with that tough strength of schedule right in front of them, the Baltimore Ravens have a sign that the rest of the division, the rest of the NFC North, is getting better. The Cincinnati Bengals, with #1 overall pick Joe Burrow from last year, pairing him up with his college teammate Jamar Chase, is going to be an absolute dynamic duo, as long as the offensive line can hold up, of course. They got a good stack of wide receivers, and the Cincinnati Bengals are improving. And my last video, I talked about the Cleveland Browns as a potential Super Bowl contender this year, and the Pittsburgh Steelers, still not too shabby. They might have been the weakest link as far as this offseason, as far as movement, with a lot of losses, especially along the offensive line. The Pittsburgh Steelers are still nothing to scoff at. So with all that out of the way, it's time to do what you came here for, predicting the Baltimore Ravens 2021 NFL season. Weeks 1 through 5 see them going to Las Vegas to take on the Las Vegas Raiders, then going right back home to take on the AFC champion Kansas City Chiefs. The Detroit Lions, they're meeting in Detroit and then flying out to Denver to play the Broncos, and then rounding out that week 5 with an Indianapolis home game. So this is an interesting first stretch for the Baltimore Ravens. I could easily see them getting 3 out of 5 wins here, but let's be a little more ambitious and say they get 4 wins. That little bit of a coin flip for me is the Indianapolis Colts. Who knows how Carson Wentz is going to settle into that offense, but the one loss is still going to be the Kansas City Chiefs. The Kansas City Chiefs are, in my opinion, the leaders in the AFC, but we're going to talk about that a little bit more later. But 4-1 is not a bad start. Week 6 through 10, starting things off at home against the Los Angeles Chargers, taking on an in-division rival, the Cincinnati Bengals, then hitting the bye week, finding the Minnesota Vikings at home right after that, and then heading down to South Florida to take on the Miami Dolphins in week 10. So a little bit of an earlier bye coming down the pipeline for the Ravens is going to see them taking on 4 pretty interesting teams, but I would not be surprised if they at least go 3-1 during this stretch, bringing their overall record to a 7-2 clip. So after week 10, that final 8-week stretch is where things are going to get challenging for the Baltimore Ravens. Weeks 11 through 15 see them starting off in Chicago to take on the Bears, heading back home to take the Cleveland Browns, back up to Pittsburgh for a road trip with the Steelers, and then flying over to Cleveland to take on the Browns back at home there, then rounding out that stretch with the Green Bay Packers back in Baltimore. So 3 division games back to back to back, and the Cleveland Browns have a bye week between that stretch that's going to put them at a huge advantage over the Baltimore Ravens. Don't be surprised if they get 3 wins here during this stretch, especially with the volatility still of the Aaron Rodgers situation. Some signs are pointing that he's planning to come back and play during the season, but until we find that out for sure, it's going to be up in the air. So we're going to say about 3-2 here, and then they're going to have a 10-win, 4-loss record. Final 3-game stretch going on to Cincinnati in week 16. Week 17, see them taking on the Los Angeles Rams at home, and then following that up with the Pittsburgh Steelers week 18. So these final 3 games can absolutely decide the NFC North Division winner. The Los Angeles Rams are not going to be anything to scoff at, and those 2 in-division games with the Cincinnati Bengals and even at home versus the Pittsburgh Steelers could very well determine the fate of the entire NFC North. And as well, just a little bit of playoff positioning and maybe a little bit more home field advantage for the Baltimore Ravens. So during this stretch, I'm going to be a little ambitious here and say they go 2-1 with wins over their in-division rivals, but who knows, man? Pittsburgh could absolutely try to spoil their week 18. Maybe Pittsburgh doesn't make the playoffs this year, but they say, hey, look, we're going to make things a little bit tougher on those rival Baltimore Ravens. Who knows? But let's just project here. Let's say they go 2-1 with maybe a loss to the Los Angeles Rams, and they finish out that season at a 12-5 clip, tied with the Cleveland Browns on paper for the division. And while the Ravens and the Browns can argue technicalities about who should be the division winner and what the seeding should be, I still think both these teams are playoff teams, and both of these teams have rosters capable of being Super Bowl level rosters. So the Baltimore Ravens, Cleveland Browns, figuring out who wins the division, that's just going to become a really hairline decision for the NFL to decide that crown. But they're both going to be in the playoffs, in my opinion. These are both very, very, very good rosters. And even taking on juggernauts like the Tennessee Titans, the Buffalo Bills, and of course the reigning AFC champion Kansas City Chiefs, the Baltimore Ravens have a roster that can stack up against everybody in the NFL. So look, the Baltimore Ravens are, in my opinion, one of the Super Bowl level teams that we could be seeing in Super Bowl 56 this year. And I know that's a really high level projection, and who knows who's actually going to make it to the Super Bowl in the AFC, because there's a lot of really, really good teams. And while the Kansas City Chiefs are kind of leading from the front, I don't think the gap is really all that far apart between them and the rest of the AFC, especially when it comes to playoff time, especially when those injuries start to mount, especially when that cold weather football starts to break, bring these teams a little bit more close, bring them a little bit more even, because the hits take a little bit more off of you. They're hurting a little bit more. You're hurt, you're injured, you're tired, but it's that time of the year. The Baltimore Ravens have a team that likes to ground and pound and just smother you into the dirt. Look, the Baltimore Ravens are, in my opinion, again, a Super Bowl level roster. I'm excited to see what the AFC playoffs are going to be like this year, and I just can't wait for football to be back, baby. We're really close. August right around the corner. NFL football starting up this September. I'm ecstatic, and I'm sure you are as well. But with all that out of the way, thank you so much for watching the video. Of course, feel free to like, comment, share, subscribe, and of course, get the bell on to know every single time I'm dropping a video. My name is Tristan Blake Rines, and I'm gonna catch you in the next one. Adios.